David gripped the steering wheel of his SUV, his eyes strained against the thick canopy of the Oregon wilderness. Beside him, his wife, Elena, was staring out the passenger window, her silhouette illuminated only by the dim glow of the dashboard. David had taken this consulting gig 3 hours away from their suburban home as an excuse for a getaway. Elena had been overwhelmed with stress lately, and a secluded, rustic cabin rented for the week seemed like the perfect remedy. "It's beautiful, David," Elena murmured as the cabin finally materialized through the pine trees. It was a classic 2-story wooden structure, complete with a wraparound porch and a heavy oak front door. Thick woods pressed in on 3 sides, isolating it completely from the main road. "Told you," David smiled, cutting the engine. No emails, no traffic, just us and the woods. They spent the first evening unpacking, exploring the cozy layout, and enjoying a quiet dinner. The cabin had a massive basement packed with locked wooden crates, old furniture covered in dusty tarps, and structural pillars that cast long, distorted shadows under a single, flickering fluorescent bulb. Elena had shivered when she looked down there, but David jokingly dismissed it as rustic charm. The trouble began the very next morning. David's alarm buzzed sharply at 5:30 a.m. He rolled over, reaching out for Elena, but his hand struck cold, empty sheets. Blinking away sleep, he walked out to the kitchen. Elena was sitting at the wooden island, a half-empty mug of coffee clutched tightly in both hands. Her knuckles were white, and her eyes looked hollow. "Hey, honey, you're up early," David said, stepping closer. Elena didn't look at him immediately. When she did, her voice was a fragile whisper. "David, someone was in our room last night." David paused, a chill rippling down his spine. "What do you mean?" "Around 3 in the morning, I woke up because the room felt freezing," Elena explained, her voice trembling. "I rolled over toward the closet in the corner. It was pitch black, but the darkness looked wrong. There was a shape. A tall silhouette, just standing perfectly still in the corner, staring right at our bed. I tried to scream, but my throat locked up. I blinked, and it was gone. Then I heard a soft scratching sound inside the drywall. I haven't slept since." David felt a wave of sympathy mixed with immediate skepticism. The mind plays crazy tricks in new places, L. It was probably just the shadow of the coat rack or the tree branches outside the window. "No, David. It felt heavy. Like a real presence," she insisted. Wanting to reassure her before he left for his mandatory 4-hour corporate seminar in the nearby town, David thoroughly checked the bedroom, the closet, and even peeked into the basement. Everything was exactly as they had left it. He kissed her forehead, promising to be back by noon, and advised her to go into town to explore the local shops so she wouldn't have to sit alone in the quiet cabin. According to Elena, the moment David left, she stepped into the bathroom to take a quick shower. She had laid out a fresh pair of jeans and a neatly folded knit sweater on the unmade bed. When she stepped out, wrapping a towel around herself, her breath caught. The clothes were no longer folded. They had been aggressively dragged across the mattress, unfolded, and laid out flat in a straight, unnatural row, as if matching the anatomy of a person lying down. Worse, the thick wool socks she had placed right next to them were entirely missing. Terrified, she grabbed her backup clothes, threw them on, and literally ran out the door, calling a local taxi to take her to town. When David met her for lunch at a diner, Elena was a nervous wreck. She recounted the clothes incident, her voice shaking so violently she dropped her fork. David's skepticism began to crack. He knew his wife, she wasn't prone to hysteria. He agreed that the moment his final morning meeting concluded tomorrow, they would pack up and go home early. They returned to the cabin that evening, keeping all the lights ablaze. That night was an exercise in pure terror. At 2:15 a.m., David was startled awake by Elena gripping his arm so hard her nails tore into his skin. Thud. 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 It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking directly underneath their bedroom floorboards. David froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached into his nightstand and pulled out a heavy metal flashlight. Despite Elena's silent, tearful pleas for him to stay, David knew he couldn't just sit there like a trapped animal. He crept out into the dark hallway, clicking the flashlight on. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the living room. Everything was still. Then, he noticed the basement door at the end of the hall. It was open an inch. He was certain he had locked it before bed. David approached the door, his palms sweating against the aluminum flashlight. He pushed it open, the hinges groaning loudly. "Hello? Is anyone down there?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. No response. He descended the wooden steps, the cool, damp air of the basement hitting his face. He swept the flashlight across the maze of storage crates and dusty tarps. Nothing. He convinced himself it was just the ancient pipes of the cabin settling in the cold night air. He went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and stayed awake with Elena until dawn, holding her shivering frame. The next evening was their final night. David had spent the day in meetings, and they had already packed their suitcases into the SUV's trunk, wanting to leave at first light. They ordered a pizza from town and sat in the living room, trying to distract themselves with a movie on David's laptop. Then, around 9 p.m., a sharp, metallic clink echoed from the floor vents. It was followed by a distinct scraping sound, like wooden boxes being dragged across concrete down in the basement. Elena choked back a sob, covering her face. "David, please. Let's just sleep in the car. Please. If someone is down there, I need to know before we try to sleep," David said, a sudden surge of protective anger overriding his fear. "Stay right here. If you hear me yell, run straight to the car and lock the doors." David marched to the basement door, unlocked it, and descended. The dim yellow fluorescent bulb cast sickly shadows across the concrete floor. He walked deeper into the labyrinth of crates, his boots clicking softly. He reached the far back corner where the structural beams met the stone foundation. He stopped dead in his tracks. Tucked neatly into the narrow, dark crawlspace between two massive storage crates was a makeshift nest. There was a filthy sleeping bag, several wrappers of food from their own kitchen, and a neat, horrifying pile of Elena's missing socks. David's breath hitched. He began to back away slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he looked up at the ceiling joists directly above the nest. Crouched like an apex predator on top of a wide wooden beam, just 5 feet away from him, was a man. He was wearing a filthy, oversized gray hoodie pulled low, but David could clearly see his face. He was unnaturally pale, emulation thin, and his wide, unblinking eyes were fixed entirely on David. He was holding a rusted, serrated hunting knife in his right hand. The man didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just stared, a slow, grotesque grin spreading across his chapped lips. David's survival instinct exploded. He turned and sprinted up the wooden basement stairs, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Elena! Car! Now! Run!" He burst into the living room. Elena was already sprinting out the front door. David grabbed their 2 remaining backpacks from the couch, practically throwing himself out of the cabin. He slammed the heavy oak door behind him and bolted toward the SUV. Elena was already in the passenger seat, frantically hitting the unlock button for him. David threw the bags into the back seat, jumped into the driver's seat, and slammed his foot on the gas. The tires spun violently in the gravel before catching, throwing the vehicle forward down the dark, winding driveway. As the headlights swept past the front of the cabin one last time, David glanced up at the second-story bedroom window. Standing behind the glass, illuminated by the indoor lights they had left on, was the pale man in the gray hoodie. He wasn't chasing them. He was simply standing there, holding Elena's knit sweater against his chest, watching them escape into the night. David drove 3 hours straight without stopping, his hands shaking violently on the wheel. They called the state police from a gas station on the highway. A couple of days later, an investigator called David back. They had found the makeshift nest in the basement and verified that the man had been living inside the walls and crawlspaces of the cabin for at least 3 weeks before David and Elena had arrived, watching every single renter through the slatted floor vents. The man was never caught. From that night on, David and Elena vowed never to rent an isolated vacation home again. Marcus had spent months saving up for this trip to Tulum, Mexico, wanting everything to be perfect for Maya. They checked into a luxury eco-resort that boasted private bungalows surrounded by dense jungle on one side and a pristine beach on the other. On their third night, the common areas emptied out around midnight. Marcus and Maya decided to head to the resort's jungle-enclosed hot tub. The tub was nestled deep within a thicket of hibiscus bushes, with a roaring artificial waterfall that drowned out all external noise. They had been relaxing for about 20 minutes when the hairs on Marcus's neck stood up. Through the leaves of a large monstera plant across from the hot tub, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was crouched low on their hands and knees in the dirt, peering through a gap in the foliage. "Hey! Who's there?" Marcus shouted. The shadow instantly stood upright. Marcus scrambled out of the slippery tub, a process that took a painful 5 seconds. By the time his bare feet hit the walkway, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a tall figure in dark clothing hurrying around the corner of the jungle path. Marcus sprinted ahead, but the path was pitch black and completely empty. They began the walk back to their bungalow. To their left were the wooden walls of the guest suites, to their right was the black expanse of the jungle. As they walked directly across from their own door, a violent rustling erupted from the brush just 10 feet away. It was a heavy, deliberate sound. "Marcus, please, let's just go inside," Maya gasped, grabbing his arm. Marcus handed her the key card. "Go, lock the door." He stepped toward the edge of the path, staring into the blackness. Suddenly, a strange sound drifted out. It wasn't a voice or an animal. It was a low, rhythmic, guttural buzzing sound made from the back of someone's throat, a vibrating drone that sounded deeply unhinged. A second later, whoever it was scattered deeper into the jungle. Marcus bolted backward, slammed his bungalow door shut, and engaged the heavy deadbolt. The next morning, a resort employee walked down the row of beach chairs. He was wearing the standard white linen uniform, but he was starkly pale, with a gaunt face and intense, sunken eyes. He was carrying a professional DSLR camera with a massive telephoto lens. The man approached their chairs, a tight, artificial smile on his face. "Resort promotional photos," the man said in perfect English. "Mind if I take a quick picture?" Marcus nodded. The man lifted the heavy camera. Click shutter. Click shutter. The lens seemed to linger on Maya far longer than necessary. "Thank you," the man whispered, his smile instantly vanishing into a cold stare. He turned and vanished through a staff gate. That night was their final evening before a dawn flight. Exhausted, they stayed in their room and went to bed early. Around 2 a.m., Marcus woke up. The room was dark, save for the moonlight filtering through the glass sliding doors that led to their private screened-in patio. They had left the glass doors open, leaving only the mesh bug screen closed, to let the ocean breeze in. But Marcus didn't hear waves. He heard a tiny, distinct electronic sound coming from the patio. Beep. Click shutter. Beep. Marcus sat upright, his heart hammering. Standing perfectly still on their private patio, just 3 feet away from the foot of their bed, was the tall silhouette. The person was holding a bulky object to their face. The camera's autofocus light flashed a faint, demonic red, illuminating the gaunt face of the photographer, from the beach. He was taking photos of them while they slept. "Get the hell out of here!" Marcus roared, lunging toward the door. The man slowly lowered the camera, stared at Marcus through the screen for one horrifying second, and then melted into the jungle. Maya woke up screaming as Marcus slammed and locked the glass doors. 10 minutes later, the night manager and security arrived. When Marcus recounted the incidents, the manager's face drained of color. "Sir," the manager trembled, "we do not have a resort photographer. All of our staff are local. We have no white employees on the roster." Before boarding their airport shuttle at dawn, the manager called Marcus into the security office to view perimeter footage. On the screen, the pale man hadn't been staying at the resort. The footage showed him lurking in the tree line for 2 straight days, using his massive zoom lens to take hundreds of photos of Maya through the bungalow windows and from behind bushes. The most chilling part was the footage from an hour ago. It showed the man pressing his face against their patio screen, taking close-up photos of them sleeping, completely undisturbed. The man was never found, and Marcus never slept without heavy blackout curtains again. It was 3:30 a.m., and Nolan was white-knuckling the steering wheel of his sedan, driving through the night to surprise his parents in upstate New York. He hadn't told them he was coming, only texting his older brother. The moment he crossed into Pennsylvania, a dense mountain fog rolled in, dropping visibility to less than 10 feet. Suddenly, neon orange signs appeared, "Detour ahead. All lanes exit immediately." Nolan followed the arrow onto a narrow, two-lane rural road. Within minutes, his GPS completely lost signal. The intense concentration drained him. His eyelids grew heavy. He dozed off for a fraction of a second, and the car drifted. The tires caught the muddy shoulder. Nolan snapped awake, panicking, and violently jerked the wheel. The sedan slid sideways across the wet asphalt, struck a rotting wooden guardrail, and plunged nose-first down a steep drainage ditch, slamming into the deep mud. Nolan scrambled over the center console and managed to force the passenger door open, crawling out into the freezing night air. His phone screen was completely shattered and dead. He was stranded. 10 minutes passed. Then, two yellow halos of light materialized through the fog. A battered, rusted 1990s pickup truck came to a stop 20 feet away. The window rolled down to reveal an elderly couple. The woman was incredibly obese, with thin, greasy hair. The man driving was massive, with a thick gray beard and overalls. A foul odor of rotting meat drifted out from the cab. "Looks like you had a nasty spill, boy," the woman rasped, her smile revealing rotten teeth. "We got a heavy tow chain in the back. Caleb here can yank your car right out." Caleb stepped out without a word, walking to the bed of the truck where the heavy clinking of an iron chain echoed. The old woman stepped out too, closing the distance until she stood uncomfortably close to Nolan. She began a rapid, erratic tirade about government surveillance and property lines. Her massive frame physically hurting Nolan backward toward the rear of the truck. "I'll go check the front bumper to see where Caleb can attach the chain," Nolan said, his survival instincts screaming. "Oh, don't worry about Caleb," the woman whispered, her voice snapping into a cold calm. She grabbed Nolan's forearm with an iron grip. "Before we pull you out, you need to look in the bed of the truck. We found something real special in the woods tonight." Nolan looked over his shoulder. A heavy blue tarp was laid flat across the truck bed, completely covering a large, lumpy shape. Caleb was now standing on his left, cutting off his escape. "Paul!" "Now," the old woman suddenly screamed. The heavy blue tarp violently flew backward. A young, muscular man with a face covered in jagged scars leaped up from beneath it, wielding a massive, rusted meat cleaver. He lunged over the tailgate, his left hand tearing through the air to grab Nolan's throat. Nolan threw his weight backward, slipping out of the woman's greasy grip. He fell hard onto the asphalt as the meat cleaver whistled through the air, striking the metal tailgate with a horrifying clang. Paul vaulted completely over the side of the truck, landing on the pavement as the old woman screamed, "Get him! Cut him down!" Nolan scrambled to his feet, vaulted over the guardrail, and threw himself headfirst into the pitch-black woods. Behind him, he could hear the heavy, aggressive thudding of boots chasing him. Paul was fast, tearing through the brush. Nolan ran blindly, driven by raw adrenaline, until the footsteps behind him finally faded that he crouched beneath the roots of a fallen oak tree, paralyzingly still. About 30 minutes later, the old woman's voice drifted through the damp fog. "Sonny boy, come on out. Caleb pulled your car out of the ditch. We just want to give you a ride." Nolan held his breath, not moving an inch. When dawn finally filtered through the canopy, Nolan cautiously made his way back to the road. The pickup truck was gone. He walked up to his sedan. It was still deep in the ditch, but it had been completely destroyed. All four doors were wide open. His suitcases had been dragged out onto the asphalt and slashed open, his belongings stolen. Vicious blade cuts shredded the interior leather seats, leaving the inside looking like an absolute slaughterhouse. Nolan ran 2 miles down the road until he reached a 24-hour truck stop, where the cashier called the police. The dangerous, isolated family was never found.